very famous for, you joined a women's magazine and there was a voice that you had, so it might be the Cosmo voice. And my feeling is that you can't impose a voice on writers, but also I don't think the world should have one voice. So first of all, and I will get onto to answer your question, but Cosmo has very divergent voices. You turn a page and there'll be something which will probably shock you and surprise you, but it will make you go away and think, which is the point of magazines. When it comes to, so that is different for women's magazines, I think. Your question is about models and industry standards. Well, it's like, what is normal? I mean, you know, actually I think a lot of the time what you see on magazines is not normal, is not reality, and Cosmo is a big commercial magazine which speaks to all sizes. It speaks to women who are size 6, it speaks to women who are size 26, and that's obviously not always represented, and so I was talking to my fashion director the other day and we were looking at all of our fashion shoots that we've done over the last year, and it occurred to us, because we don't do this, and again I'm very proud of this with Cosmo, we try not to be tokenistic. We don't go, well, we need to have a plus size model. It is what it is. It's just a natural, it just feels right. But actually with our fashion shoots, we've actually stopped using model agencies way more than we ever did, and actually we, not mainly, but it's kind of 50-50 now, use real people in our fashion shoots. And there is no reason for that other than it feels right. That feels like what our readers want. It is important to show real bodies. And of course, obviously, recently we did we did a cover with a size 26 lady, but it wasn't a big deal because it became a big deal. But it wasn't because I'd always put plus size women on the cover. But it was interesting. It was when we'd put, I think we'd put Rebel Wilson on the cover and we'd put Ashley Graham on the cover. But actually we had a model called Tess Holliday on our cover. I think what she proved was that people could tolerate different body types, but just not that body type. And so what it did was it opened up a conversation, which is the whole point of magazines, which is, what is normal? What is acceptable? Well, the truth is everything is acceptable.
So it's about trying to promote a culture where diversity is the kind of unthinking accepted norm rather than something we aim for.
I think so. I think if you are going, we have to be diverse, well, and some people have to do that. They have to challenge their own prejudice, and if that means they have to go, okay, we need to be diverse, that's what they have to do. But for me, diversity it's just, I mean, my whole career has been, I don't actually think in terms of diversity, I think in terms of, is this the best person? Is this the best person or the right voice for my magazine? I'm very fortunate in that what that ends up with is the Cosmo magazine or the Cosmo universe is very diverse, but they're there because they're the best people to be in my magazine, and that's really important.
Fantastic. So more generally on the kind of way Cosmo and magazines in general are progressing, you talk about the purpose of magazines. How do you see the revolution of paper magazines in the future as everything moves more and more online and people are buying less paper magazines? So
the revolution, or do you mean what is the future of print magazines?
Yes, will we see them in 10 years' time, would you say?
Yeah, I think you will. But I think what will happen is there will be, and it's happening to some degree now, is it's natural selection, isn't it? It's like if you have a very strong brand with very strong values, then you will always have a place on the newsstand. I think perhaps the mistake that some magazines have made, not all of them, but some of them, is that kind of when the digital revolution was happening, I think some magazines panicked and they thought that actually you had to ape what digital was doing. So I remember reading some magazines a few years ago and all the copy was very, very short. And it occurred to me when I joined Cosmo, I remember saying to the team, I said, the aim is not to ape digital. The aim is to become printier. Print needs to become printier. Print needs to be more about what you can do in print. And of course, what you can do in print, which is the genius of print, and I think is very important in this day and age, is you have time. And so if you have time as a journalist, what you do is you have a duty of care to investigate things properly. And Cosmo has gone back to what we used to do in the 60s, which is we do long-form investigative journalism. I got rid of columns. I don't believe in columns for Cosmo. I think the world has enough extreme views. It has enough opinions. What it doesn't have a lot of is journalists who put all the information out there from both sides and then presents it to the reader and then the reader makes up their own mind. And so magazines that do that will always have a future.
Fantastic. So that's something very different in an age where we don't seem to often trust the news. So you talked about almost returning to the 1960s version of investigative journalism. In the 1960s, there was also a kind of sexual revolution element of Cosmo that was born. Do you think that retains its relevance today, and how do you feel it's progressing?
Well, I mean, all magazines have to reflect the culture in which they are born or the culture in which they are going through. So so part of my job is, well, what's happening in culture now? One of the reasons, when I joined Cosmo, one of the first things I did was I got rid of the naked. We used to have a very famous naked male centerfold, of which Burt Reynolds was the original one. And it had always been very famous for Cosmo because at the time there was a sexual revolution going on. Women wanted to see men in the same way men had viewed women. It was right for the time. But of course, culture has changed. And my feeling is that as women, if we don't want to be objectified, we can't then go and objectify men. We can't, true equality is just that, it is equality. So actually my version of Cosmo is there is a different sort of sexual revolution going on. It's an important sexual revolution. I mean, one of the things that we do at Cosmo, and I was talking to someone earlier here, which is probably the thing I am most proud of, is we have started doing a pilot scheme which we're rolling out of sex education in schools. And the information, we do it with Men's Health. And the reason we did that, A, is because Cosmo has always been known for sex, but also because there is I wouldn't call it revolution, but there is an evolution in how kids are learning about sex, and they're learning about porn. Their first interaction with sex is porn, and there's a lot of debate around, well, is that the first way that they should be viewing sex? There's a lot going on about consent, as we know. And so my feeling is that, well, kids, and the government does not have stipulated sex education at the moment, and some of it I felt was woefully out of date. So we go into schools and we do sex education. The thing that's really important about that, and this is coming on to your point about is there a sexual revolution? Well, what is going on at the moment is about what happens when you have two people in a room together. And the important thing is the big debate at the moment is about consent. And so one of the things when we go into schools is we make sure that girls are having exactly the same sex education as boys, so that when they are together, and we don't know what happens when two people are together, we will never know, but the best that you can hope is that they have the same understanding of what is expected. So it's a different sexual revolution. And so how am I playing my part? But by doing that.
Yeah. So you talked about how you're providing sex education to children. What do you think is the kind of now age range that Cosmopolitan is? Who's reading it? So
I say children, they're teenagers, actually.
Teenagers.
They're teens,
so you think teenagers as well as...
It's different because Cosmo is across so many platforms now. So we are the biggest, I think, channel on Snapchat Discover. We have 1 million women and men every day. And that skews younger. So that's going to be like 14 to 17. The website is kind of early 20s. The magazine is late 20s, early 30s. Our events, we have lots of events. That is an older consumer. We have Cosmopolitan houses where we house young women who want to work in the creative industries but can't afford to be in London. They are kind of 23, 24. So actually, Cosmo reaches everyone from kind of 13 right up to 50.
Wow.
And they might be consuming it on different platforms, and I don't have a problem with that. What I have to make sure as the brand guardian of Cosmo, the brand, is that the values of this magazine or this brand are the same across every single one, so that somebody that discovers us on Snapchat Discover, when they discover us in the magazine, it feels like the same thing.
Yeah, keeping the same values, do you think, now that you know that different age ranges and different types of people are consuming the magazines via different platforms, do you try and tailor the content in different ways to that? Yeah,
you have to tailor the content. So the content will never be the same. We don't deliberately give away, and I don't believe you should, give away what is in the print product. We don't put that online. We don't. You pay for that. Writers do not get paid very well as it is, and I always say to writers, try not to do much free stuff in your career when you're starting out. Your voice costs something, so I don't believe in giving it out free. The website is slightly different, it's smaller. Sometimes they will have stuff on Kim Kardashian that perhaps we wouldn't do. Snapchat will be shorter again. It might be memes, but the thing is that the value kind of has to be the same. So we will always be across all those platforms quite irreverent. The humour will be quite surreal. The ethos will be about, I say empowering. I was saying earlier to someone, empowering has become such a kind of marketable word. We say we empower. Cosmo is about empowerment in action. So we empower women. Well, what do? We do sex, we do sex education, we do houses. We actually could show what we're doing rather than just talking about it. So the content is different and it has to be, but the values have to be the same.
So do you think Cosmopolitan has kind of moved beyond the segmentation between like women's magazines and men's magazines? Or do you think it's kind of a magazine like by women for women still?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's actually an interesting space because men's magazines have, apart from, I think you had Dylan here recently, from GQ, there are still some going, Esquire's still going, GQ's still going, they're brilliant magazines, Men's Health, but a lot of the men's Zoo, Nuts, Loaded, FHM, they've all closed. And so where are men going? We are really interesting as a magazine. So in the last year, I've always been very clear on I want Cosmo to be a voice for everyone. So actually, I deliberately, I worry about cutting men out of the current conversation that's going on. And I've always been very clear about that. I'm a feminist in that it's complete equality between men and women. I don't think you should shut men out from conversations. And I worry that some men are feeling very nervous about their role at the moment. They're scared to talk. So at Cosmo, what we've done from the day I took over is we talk about, we are a platform for men to talk about their fears. And if they want to talk to women and explain what's going on, then there is a place for them. In the last year, and actually in the last week, I have had a number of young men come to me and go, very similar feelings actually. I don't know in a kind of whole Me Too world, what I'm doing is right, I feel nervous, blah, blah, blah. And they go, would you publish it? Because we don't know how to talk about this. And I will always say, if you write a considered piece, we will publish it. I mean, we published a piece, the best piece of the year, I think. We had a young writer who came to a writing workshop that me and my husband did. She said to my husband, actually, she said, I have a story. She said, I was raped. She was at Columbia University, and she said Columbia at that time was very interesting because you had Mattress Girl, and there was a lot going on, and it was quite a hotbed of kind of politics there. And she was raped. She wasn't raped on campus, but you had the whole background of Mattress Girl going on. And she said she dealt with the rape, and it was awful, and it was traumatic, and it was everything you would expect. She said, but I think it was about a year later, she started to tell some of the women at Columbia what had happened to her. Excuse me. And she said what happened was at first, the sisterhood, who were supposed to be caring and whatnot, said, great, you can now be the face of this movement. And she said, I don't want to be. I don't want to be defined by this thing that's happened to me. I've dealt with it. And she said they turned on her. And she said, I mean, it was very powerful. She said it was her rape. This is not the exact wording, but she said something like, my rape was anticlimactic compared to the vitriol I faced. Now, that is an unpopular piece to publish. And actually, it was in the same issue as Tess Holliday. We didn't think Tess Holliday would get all the press it did. We thought, her name is Laura. We thought Laura's piece would get a lot of heat because it's not a popular view to take, to say that women would demonize other women for what happened. And actually, we just got overwhelming support from women going, I'm glad you've talked about that. And that's what the media should be. It shouldn't be one narrative. So that's hopefully what Cosmo is becoming now, diverse voices and thoughts. And they don't all agree with one another. That's right.
So you think ideally as time progresses, the kind of boundary, the distinction between men and women's magazines is going to close?
I think because, a good piece of journalism, and me and my husband is here somewhere, we talk about a good piece of journalism, a woman should be able to read it just as much as a man, just as much as any person. And the humour is the same. I don't believe in gender-based humour. If something is funny, if something is clever, everybody is going to find it. I mean, genius journalists mean that a 9-year-old can understand it on one level and a 70-year-old can read it on one level, and it doesn't matter what your gender is at all. That should be the key. So we have a lot of men that read the magazine.
Fantastic. So slightly switching tack, Has your definition, you talk more about leadership in your book. Has your definition of a leader changed over the course of your career? Like, what do you think you've learned about leadership in general?
Well, I think, I think it has changed. I think it's changed in lots of different ways. I think when I was coming through, leadership was very hierarchical. And you still need hierarchy because somebody's got to take the heat at the end of the day. You know, if anything goes wrong with Cosmo, I ultimately have to shoulder that. But I think the days of when you just listen to your boss and you just have to do exactly what your boss does, you still have to do what your boss suggests. But I think bosses have to, in the way that employees are trying to always prove themselves to their bosses, I think bosses also have to prove to their employees that they're really good. And the reason they're at the top is because they work harder than anyone else, they stay later than anyone else, they will do the really hard bits. I don't think because you get to the top, you get to just tell people what to do. You'll still always have to prove to yourself. And I think the other thing that's important is, I think, and I've talked about this before, is that when I started out in journalism, I was naturally an introvert, and I still am. I like solitude, I like quiet. But when I started out in journalism, I would always be the person in meetings who I had a lot to say, but I didn't feel comfortable kind of baiting it out with the loud person in the corner. And I realised quite quickly that I wasn't going to get on if I remained like that. And actually, I probably in like my second job, I started being louder and more aggressive, rightly or wrongly. And I was rewarded. I started to move up the ladder. Now, I'm not saying that's right because I don't think it is, but I think because of that, I am now in a position in that I'm near the top, but I'm naturally an introvert. So recently I was talking to someone earlier about this. When it came to promoting people in my team, I promoted 2 women at the same time. One of them was exactly the old definition of what you thought was a leader, which was she's very blunt, she's incredibly driven, she's very outspoken. But I also promoted somebody who is a real introvert. She doesn't speak the loudest in meetings. She's a very considered person. They are both equal leaders. And I think that only happens when you have somebody near the top who is a different sort of leader. They can identify. All leaders don't have to be the loudest person in the room, really.
So you think it's about kind of fostering an attitude where everybody's individually, whether an introvert or extrovert, can perform at their best rather than taking boxes? Because it seems there's quite a gendered element to the person who stays quiet in meetings, to the person who is talked over. And I was wondering how much you thought about that in your...
Sorry, it's gendered?
Yeah, I mean, I think women probably tend to stay quiet in meetings a lot more than men generally.
But do you know what? I always try, because people go, well, it's a gender thing, and I don't know. But what I would say is, if we keep saying it's a gender thing, what happens is women go, it's a gender thing, that's why. And sometimes the more you tell people it's because you're a woman, you don't speak up, or it's because your imposter syndrome is a really good example, where women are being told, we've got imposter syndrome. And I always say, that's a really good thing, actually, because actually if you have imposter syndrome, you're always thinking about, well, if I don't know the answer to this, so you go and find out the answers, which often means you're the most knowledgeable person at the table. Are women generally quieter? Maybe, in my experience, actually, round the tables in the publishing world, that's not been my experience, actually. The women, and the women in publishing outnumber the men. But I think, do you know what? I try to not think in terms of gender stereotypes. I think it's introverts and extroverts, and there are lots of men who are introverts who are not rewarded as much as there are introverted women. And I think, even if you're an introvert, though, what I would say to people is, I had to change the way I was, and actually I think good leaders will not require you to change. And if you are an introvert and you're in a meeting and actually you can't have the words to say it, what you should do is, because what I used to do was never communicate what I thought, is actually go and find the boss later on, and a good boss will listen to you. They will understand that that wasn't the right arena in which you needed to communicate your ideas. So if you're an introvert, you don't have to become an extrovert, but what you need to find is another way to communicate. And I think that's the thing. People are individuals, aren't they, rather than big groups. I try not to think of people in terms of groups. It's like individuals. And so, work out a strategy that works for you, and good bosses will listen, and if they won't, then you should probably think about, is that who you want to work for? Yeah.
So it's a very two-way process between the employee and the boss.
That's it, yeah. It is. Hopefully I listen to everyone, hopefully.
No, that makes perfect sense. And in what other ways, so you talked about moving like beyond gender stereotypes to thinking about people in different groupings so we don't like enforce stereotypes. In what other ways have you tried to modernize Cosmopolitan, either the content or the structure, since you became editor?
Oh God, like so many different ways. I mean, the fashion shoots are different. Beauty is really interesting. Beauty used to be about products, and actually the beauty teams on magazines, people think, well, they just kind of, play around with beauty products. And of course, they're journalists. And so our beauty journalism, they've won all the awards, my beauty department. How we do beauty is we still do products, but actually the beauty landscape is an interesting and fascinating world. They also have been forced to do long-form journalism. God, how else have we changed it? I mean, the main change is more of a dedication to long-form journalism. New voices. I sometimes take voices from people who are not journalists. If you have an amazing idea, I don't require you to have any prior experience. I don't require you to have a journalism degree or even A-levels. And actually, we're about to launch 4 paid-for scholarships where we are going to house the scholarship winners. We're doing writers, fashion, art, and beauty. You don't need to come with any sort of qualifications. And I think that's one of the things that people are a bit surprised with Cosmo is we have voices in there that perhaps don't usually get heard, and they're cut out of the conversation because they don't come with all the shiny qualifications. So I think that is another thing we've done. I think the amount of content about men is really interesting because there isn't really anybody doing that. It's not very fashionable at the moment to be doing that. We have a place. I mean, pretty much everything has changed, and yet everything has stayed the same because it was always about empowering women. I suppose now I would say we hopefully empower everyone, but not just through words, beyond the page, and that's the biggest thing. The other thing we do every year is we have a big conference and we give away an office in central London to a self-made entrepreneur. I would say that is empowerment in action in a way we've never been able to do before in Cosmo. So radical changes, and yet not big changes.
That certainly sounds like a lot, yeah.
Yes, it is quite a lot.
Wow. So over your time, how do you think like the narrative of beauty, what we think of as beauty, has changed? Do you think it's been affected by you bringing in these kind of people from outside of the traditional like journalism background?
Narrative of beauty or narratives in general? Narrative of beauty.
Yeah, well, then we narrative of beauty first, and then we can move on to narratives in general.
So narrative of beauty, well, do you know what? I think with one of the wonderful things about social media is it is all of these movements, and is the fact that everybody is now allowed a shop window to talk about what they think is beautiful. So actually, it's not just magazines, but I do think magazines have a very powerful role to play. I think the definition of beauty, I mean, actually, beauty is a really interesting thing because actually, I kind of think, don't get hung up on it. We are deliberate in this, actually. Recently, we were thinking about how we talk about celebrities. And if you look at so many celebrity interviews, one of the first things when they're talking about women they start with is, she's wearing jeans and a white top and she's beautiful. And I try to not make reference to the way they look, unless, of course, there is something really worth talking about, which is pertinent to the rest of the piece. So the language of beauty, I think you have to be careful about, and we are. One of the other things we do with beauty is we try and show Afro hair in its natural form because, and again, this is something that you go along your life not thinking about, and then actually when we stopped and thought about it, it was like, well, Afro hair is very different to Asian hair, to Caucasian hair, and when you're writing about hair, it's very different for a black woman. You know, it's completely different. And actually now what we started doing, whenever we write hair features, we will write a hair feature, but we will also talk about black hair because it's very different. Black models, when we use them, our preference, though we would never mandate this because I don't believe in that, but we would like to show natural Afro hair. I don't think it gets seen a lot. You see a lot of straightened hair. I think, and of course it's ultimately their choice, but I think that's important as well to show what that looks like to young, women growing up. It's like Afros are amazing and beautiful, and You don't see enough of that. So we're quite, we prefer, if we can, to show natural Afro hair.
And do you think that by expanding like the diversity of the people you put in and the kind of people you show, that you're giving like girls who are looking at this, you're expanding what they think of as choice and how to present themselves?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Yeah, and also. It goes back to that one note of magazines. Not all magazines shouldn't be the same thing from the first page to the last, actually. The 170 pages or however long your magazine is, every page should be very different, and it should agitate thought. It should also agitate thought about what is beautiful. I think, I don't think really people should be taking their cues from magazines as to what is beautiful. I'm more interested in magazines are a place of entertainment, but they're a place of information. I think if one of the things that I've done with Cosmo and the diversity of body shape or beauty or the journalism is make people understand that there are different ways of being beautiful, then that kind of my job is done, really.
Fantastic. The final question, this is, one of the ones I like asking most. What do you love most about Cosmo? What do you love most about your job as editor?
I love that. I always used to apply for jobs at Cosmo and they never would let me through the door. So I love being editor now. What do I love about it? I love that. So we have features meetings where I sit with all of my writers, and sometimes they can go on for, I say days, so we'll do it for 4 hours and then we'll have to do another 4 hours. And basically what those meetings are is they are conversations about culture and patterns happening in culture. So I always say to my team, because people say, where do feature ideas come from? And I say, well, actually, the best feature ideas come from your friends, or better still, I get most of my feature ideas from Instagram. So on Instagram, you have an explore page. Mm-hmm. If you look at that explore page, you start to notice patterns of behavior. And one of, probably the second best piece we ran this year was about escorting. And I remember it was looking at Instagram, and I remember seeing all these young women. And they all, nothing wrong with this, by the way, they'd all had like their butt implants and their lips done, and they had like designer bags, and a lot of them were in Dubai. And I remember just thinking, well, it's really expensive, all of this stuff. How are they funding it? And again, I just kept seeing it. And if you keep seeing something, then I think you should investigate it. And I remember in my features meeting just saying to someone, can someone look into this? Because I just have a feeling there's something slightly. And anyway, somebody came back the day later and said, yeah, if you put into Instagram, I think it's #courtesan, she said this whole other world comes up. And then that journalist went off and investigated it, and escorting through Instagram, people being approached through Instagram, but also people selling their wares through Instagram, is a massive thing. So that is the best bit of my job, is we get to look for patterns in the world, but then we get to investigate them to find out the true story and get both sides of the story, and then we get to print it, and hopefully people read it, and hopefully it changes perceptions, because, I think one of the most important things to writers, and my husband talks about this with me all the time, is as a writer you should never ever go in with an agenda. The bravest thing anybody can do is change their mind. And so with the escorting, I think the writer that did it had an idea of what escorting was, and by the end of the piece, after speaking to all these women, and there were some men in it as well, they understood why they were doing it. It was, I can't remember the exact reasons. So I think that's important, and that's the brilliant thing about journalism. If you get people to think differently, or maybe change their mind, or challenge their prejudices, that's something worth doing. It makes your job really interesting.
That sounds fantastic and really worthwhile. So thanks so much for agreeing to have this interview. We're going to do a Q&A now, so if anybody has any questions, just raise your hand, and one of the stewards will come to you with a microphone. So just over there at the back. Yeah, good job.
Thank you for your talk, Ms. Storr.
Oh, sorry, I can't hear you. 1 second.
No, don't worry about it. Sorry, can you hear me now?
I can hear you, yeah.
Cool, thank you. Well, thank you very much for your talk. So I just wanted your thoughts on this recent campaign. So it wasn't a diversity campaign as such. I mean, it was the Dolce & Gabbana campaign, like specifically for Chinese consumers in China. But I still want to get your thoughts on this because I'm quite interested. So that campaign showing a Chinese model trying to eat sort of Italian foods like pasta and pizza with sort of chopsticks and failing, it was received with a lot of vitriol from people who kind of thought it played on stereotypes of this kind of particular culture and what it represented. And I'm really invested in Chinese culture. I'm really interested in a lot of cultures around the world and what they may represent. And this kind of promotion of diversity is all well and good, but how would you make sure that Cosmopolitan in Britain, and also in other places around the world where it's printed, kind of embrace that ideal without falling back on quite derivative stereotypes of that culture that they're trying to promote at the same time?
Well, the way that I suppose you get round that is you have to have a diverse team, because, you know, say you were in my team, you, or, you know, God forbid, say I came up with that idea, which I wouldn't come up with that idea, but say I did. Somebody, if you have a diverse team who have different life experiences and different points of view, which is why you should never always agree with your leader, that is just deadly. By having a diverse team around you, these things should not happen, because somebody, and also having a leader who allows other people to speak up and go, I know you're the boss, this is absolutely the wrong thing to do. This sort of thing should not happen. I mean, one of the things that I'm not campaigning, but I'm trying really hard to do is the media and the fashion world, you know, really needs to change the people that work in it. And so, rightly or wrongly, the media is monopolised a lot by, and again, nothing wrong with this, I'm not demonising anyone, but by Caucasian middle-class men and women. Now, of course, when you look at that, the reason is it's a social mobility thing, which is to work in the media, you have to live in London. We don't do this, but you have to do some unpaid work experience. We pay all our interns, by the way. So you're only going to attract the same sort of people. And when you attract the same sort of people, which is why groups can be really dangerous if everybody thinks the same, you're going to end up with problems like this. And the other thing about groups, of course, is that in a group, everybody thinks the same, or if they don't think the same, but the group is so powerful, the person in there who goes, that's a really bad idea to do that campaign, they're too scared to speak up. Does that answer your question? So it's quite a long game, but it's about having diverse, and when I say diverse, I don't just mean from ethnic backgrounds, I mean from different classes, all sorts of, there's lots of different sorts of diversity. That is the key, really.
Fantastic. Any other questions? Nope, well, thank you very much.
Oh, there's a lady here, the last minute.
Amazing.
Hello, thank you again for your talk. I wanted to ask you what you think, I just said thank you for your talk. I wanted to know what you think about the role of fashion magazine within the repercussion of the fashion industry. Because the fashion industry is a very wasteful industry,
right,
in terms of environmental issues, what it can, and also in terms of the work that it implies within for example, like Southeast Asian countries. What do you think a magazine like yours that does have a lot of fashion pieces, how do you think it really inscribes in it, or what do you think?
How do we help? How do we change the narrative around not just buy? So we have done a lot at the moment. Do you know what? I think we need to look at the language as well, because what I'm starting to find, and I was talking to another fashion editor about this recently, is the word sustainable with a whole generation of people. It has a kind of, it has quite a hippie-ish vibe to it, so people don't quite understand. So I think there needs to be some language around it. The other thing is at Cosmo, what we've started doing, we just did a very big piece in it, we start talking about vintage a lot. And that's one of the ways that we're looking at it. I mean, look, the fashion industry they are trying to get their head round, how do we make this less wasteful? There was somebody, I can't remember who it was, it might have been Vogue, it might not have been, but they were like, Black Friday, don't go out, don't spend, you have enough already. We do lots, so we do a lot on vintage, we do a lot on, I buy loads of my clothes from eBay. You know, I am not a wasteful person at all, and I talk about that a lot because I think it's important, again, if you have a platform to talk about your habits. But it's, you know, the fashion industry is really having to think about this, and I don't have an answer to it, but my answer in terms of helping to educate or inform my consumers is there is a different way of consuming, and one of the things we think is really important is secondhand clothes, changing the narrative on that, because I think for a long time, secondhand clothes, people are like, oh my God, we're actually this is a really, not only a really cool way and the right way to shop, but it's a very individual way to shop. You know, actually, as much as I like Zara, you buy a Zara dress and everybody is wearing it. You go vintage shopping or you buy your stuff on eBay, you will be completely individual. So there's lots of kind of work being done there. But it's a big problem. It is, you know.
Oh, at the back there?
Hi, I just wondered, I guess it is possibly ties into representing different points of view, but how do you balance things like body positivity and accepting and promoting normality with the fact that some people are very interested in fitness and in health and in their diet? Because sometimes, and I'm not saying this happens in your magazine, I find that I'm reading something and I feel great that there's lots of bodies represented, and I'll turn and there'll be an advert for a diet tea or something, and how do you balance both sides of that debate?
Well, we don't do that, so we don't do anything which promotes, weight loss lollipops or anything like that. So hang on. So is your question, how do you reconcile pieces on body positivity with ads, or do you mean in a magazine where you have one thing which is about fitness and then you turn the page and there's a big thing on body positivity?
Yeah, I think within the magazine. So how do you manage to write to people who are interested in fitness and in their diet whilst not going too far down that weight loss control side of things?
Yeah, I think, well, look, I used to edit, I launched Women's Health, so I used to work on a health magazine. So Cosmo does have more health than we ever had in before. And this all goes back to judgment and diversity, which is there are some of my readers who want to lose weight. There just are. You can't say you're an evil person for wanting to lose weight. What about body positivity? That is their choice, and that is what, feminism is about. It's about respecting people's choice. So when we don't do diets though. I mean, we just don't. But we do fitness pages where we go, get in shape. But if, what I like to think, and this is why I really love Cosmo readers, they're really cool. The only time they've ever taken me to task was when, quite rightfully, I did a naughty page on the shameful objectification of Michael Fassbender. It's the only time we got complaints. So they are really cool. But I think you can have a fitness page and then you can turn the page and somebody is talking, is a size 26 going, I'm totally cool with the way I am. That is the purpose of magazines, is that you should have a place. I bet in this room, I think you've all got completely different opinions on the world. But that is right. You can't have the left. You need the right and the left. So, and we have not had any problems with people going, well, on one page you've got a thing on body positivity, but on the next page you've got something on exercise. And that boils down to being brave, because if you are an editor, or if you are a writer, you have to understand, and I've had this with a lot of young writers, that people are going to mob you on Twitter, people will always complain, but if you think it is the right thing to do, then you're never going to be wrong if you think it's the right thing to do. So you have to stand by that. But we've never had any issues with that, because I don't think it's hypocrisy. I think it's different things for different people. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, no, that was actually really refreshing to hear.
Ooh, another one?
Hello, my name's Yvonne. Thank you for coming here today. I'm doing a PhD on the experiences of women that have waited too long for a child and that are infertile, and although they wanted to combine a career and a family, they weren't able to do so. And I think I've read an interview where you talked about this problem, specifically how lots of media convey the illusion that women could have it all, when actually that's quite difficult. And I'm just wondering whether this is a topic that you're discussing at Cosmopolitan, or what your thoughts were on it.
I mean, I wrote that piece and it had a very mixed reception because Cosmo came up with having it all, you can have it all. And my counter argument was, well, first of all, should you want to have it all? Because having it all, you're putting yourself under a lot of pressure. And I talked about, and this is my personal opinion, I chose not to have it all. And actually, I didn't think I could have it all. When it came to me editing Cosmo, I was 37, 38. Me and my husband were trying for kids. It didn't work for us. But then when it came to the point of, okay, are we going to have IVF? And we had to make a decision about this. I came to the conclusion that I didn't think that I could do both. And, my husband said, I will give up my career, blah, blah. But the decision was, I didn't think that I could have it all. And what I always say to people now is, having it all-ish is perhaps a more realistic notion, I think. And actually, the interesting thing about that Cosmo thing is that Cosmo, they had a very famous editor called Helen Gurley Brown, and she came up with having it all. But actually, when I researched, she had a book called Having It All, and then it became the mantra for basically women in the 70s and 80s, and all these women went on full steam ahead going, right, we can do everything. But actually, that book, when she published it, she had a fight with the publisher, and she didn't want to call it that. It was the publisher who said, no, you should call it this. And of course it took flight. So I don't think even she thought that it was possible to have everything. I don't know if it is Hillary Clinton, but somebody said, you can have it all, but not all at the same time. And that's probably closer to it. But I've always thought personally that you don't get to have everything in life. It's like happiness. You don't get to be happy all the time. And of course, why would you want to be happy all the time? Look what happens to lottery winners. They win all that money and then they get addicted to alcohol. And, so, I think my message to women, and not even just younger women, is life is about, when you're a little kid, you don't get to go to ballet class and go to the birthday party. You have to make a choice. So you have to know what's really important to you. And some women do have it all, and all power to them. But for me, I couldn't do it, and I thought it was a different side. It goes back to diversity. I thought it was a point of view worth putting out there, because I found a lot of people felt the same. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. Are there any at the front here?
I'm a 72-year-old man. Should I be reading Cosmo? If so, why? And if not, why not?
Yes, I think you should be reading Cosmo. I've just turned my 77-year-old neighbour, male. He wants to pitch me a column, but I said to him, I'm not into columns. But I said, yes, you should, because actually, I think if you want and I'm not saying other publications don't do this, but I think if you want a window into the world and all the different viewpoints there are, I think it's a good place. And actually, it goes back to what I was saying to you, there is no age limit for Cosmo, like there shouldn't be. It's called Cosmopolitan. Cosmopolitan suggests that this is people who have an open, curious mind about the world. So if you are open and curious, I'd say you absolutely should be reading it. And I'd like to know what you think.
Any final questions? Well, thank you so much for
Very
your
welcome.
time. I hope you've enjoyed the interview. I certainly have. In terms of events coming up later this week, tomorrow we have the presidential on should we bring back the grammar schools, which promises to be really exciting, not just because Charles Connor is speaking. And on Friday we have Kate Gilmore, who should be really exciting. And I think that might just be about it for what's been a really good and really busy term. So thank you to all of our online viewers, and another shout out to Heifers who are outside selling Farrah's book. I would urge you all to give it a look. And if you guys haven't already, check us out on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. Keep up. Watch this lovely video, which I'm sure is going online. So thank you, everybody, and thank you to Farrah, most of all.
Thank you.
Let's rock and roll.